All right, welcome back. Now it's time for us to talk about, we've got a model of our user interface. Now it's time for us to talk about a model of the user interacting with that user interface. Again, we're always going to be thinking about having things be simple. The actual reality of the way people interact with search engines obviously is very complex. We don't know what's all going on in their mind. This is something that's an open field of study. So we're going to have to keep a simplified approach here so that we can actually get some sort of model made. All right, so our first thing to think about in our user model is that users only proceed downward in the ranked list. So we give them a set of search results. They're only ever going to work down. We're never going to see them decide, I'm going to go up and click on that one again, maybe, or something. Or I know I skipped that result, but I've changed my mind and I'm going to click on it now. They're going to just work straight down. Now, again, this comes from our observations of the way users behave, that in general, we can talk about them working down a ranked list. Certainly, they're not only working down ranked lists, but in general, it's not a bad simplification to make to our model to assume that they work down the list. All right, next up, users are more likely to click on documents, or this is to click on the summaries for the documents, that are more likely I should really say that are that are, I'll just say, more likely to be relevant. I'm not quite sure this is expressing what I wanted to say, but again, remember, the idea is that when we think that a document is likely to be viewed as relevant by a user, those users are more likely to click on those links than the ones that we're pretty certain they don't want to click on. We can never be entirely sure. Now, if we could have a probe inside of a user's brain and see, oh, the user thinks that's relevant, well, they're going to click on it. And, oh, I think that's not relevant. Well, they're not going to click on it. We would remove all uncertainty. But instead, what we have is this notion of, well, we're going to end up hiring people to be making assessments and recording what we think is a notion of how likely that document is relevant to someone who's issuing a certain query. And in general, they're more likely to click on those documents than they are on the ones that we don't think they'll want to click on. And so that's part of our model, okay? And it comes again from our observations of user behavior. And then after clicking on a document, the user reads it and they make a decision about relevance. And then after they've made their decision, and maybe they've saved it, and then we're going to model that they hit their back button and resume processing the ranked list. So we'll resume working down the ranked list. All right, so this is our very simple notion of our user. Let's go ahead and put this in a bit more of a graphical form for us to look at and to see. So we can sort of view it as it's kind of like a finite state machine. So we've got some starting state, and this is basically the notion of submitting a query. So this is where the whole system starts for our model of our user interacting with the search engine. So some query has been issued somehow. And then basically, we're going to have a notion of summaries on that search results page that they can view. And so their first thing to do is they view summary I. The first one would be summary 0. And then they decide, based upon after they've looked at it, on to click or not. Okay. Am I going to click on this summary or am I not going to click on this summary? Do I want to view that document or not? All right. So let's say they decide to click on it. All right, great. So they make a motion, they actually click on it. The alternative is for them to do no clicking. All right. So if they click, well, that means then they're going to be taken to a page where they can view document I. And again, now they're in the position to decide if this document is relevant or not, because they're reading it. And that's part of our user model. All right. And so they could very well then decide, yeah, it's relevant. So they decide it's relevant. And then let's say we say their action here is just simply to save the relevant document. So maybe they bookmark it, maybe they print it, maybe they save it to their desktop, whatever it is. All right. If they don't click on it, that means that in our model that they simply go on to viewing the next summary. So they're going to view summary I+1 here, and again, decide click or not. Basically, do I think this is going to be a relevant document? If I think it's going to be a relevant document, I'm going to want to click on it and view it. And so again, they could decide to click on it. And this model continues in the same way over here. Now back up to here. I've clicked and I've said, no, I read this thing. I don't think it's actually relevant to me. So all right. So then they come and they basically hit the back button and they're back to the page. Decide not relevant. So they've decided that document's not relevant. So their action is to go to hit the back button. And they end up then, their next thing to do is to view the next summary in the ranked list. After they've saved the document as well, they're done there. And so then they head back and they go and continue down the ranked list. So this is what we were talking about with our very simple model. Each one of these nodes down here represents viewing of the next summary. Do we make a decision to click? Do we make a decision to not click? Once we're viewing a document, we're going to read it, and then we're going to decide whether it's not relevant, or if it's relevant, we'll save it in some way and then continue on with processing the search list. All right. So what is it when we have this user model now that we need? So this is sort of the outline of the user model, but you can see we can't do anything with it yet. We don't have any notion of time here. We don't know anything about these decisions that are happening. So what do we have to do? All right. So with this outline of a model, we need to fill in some information on it. We're going to have to figure out the following. So in this model, we have to decide how to do the following. How to model. We have to decide how to model the following things. One, we have to figure out how to model the time spent in each of those states. So for example, how long is it going to take to read a summary on the search results page and decide to click or not? Turns out that if you're going to actually, it's interesting. If you're going to decide that it's not relevant, you actually reach that decision pretty quickly, like in less than a second. If you actually are going to decide that it is relevant, because there's more, seems to be more consequence to that decision, because you're going to invest in actually clicking and viewing a document, that seems to take like more than a second. So yeah, the processing of these summaries is actually really fast, which is, it shouldn't be surprising. We know that we can read really quickly and we make these decisions quite fast. Nevertheless, we have to figure out some way to model this. All right. All right. So how long do you spend in each state? Same thing. How long are you going to spend reading the document? It's all part of our interactive model, right? We need to model the amount of time so that we can understand how long it takes people to get through and to find a certain number of relevant documents. You click on a non-relevant document, you're going to waste your time reading it. All right, that matters, okay? Next, the other thing that we need to model is we need to model these decisions. So how a user decides to do certain actions in the model. So these are the actions that take you out of the states. Do I click or not, for example? So again, for example, how to model the decision of clicking the summary or not. All right. Now, to me, one of the things that's fascinating about this is we can have this general model. We can say that they process the ranked list in this way. And we actually have, fascinatingly, we have lots of choices in how we're going to model the time. Even what I was talking about here for a summary, we could potentially have a model that distinguishes time based upon the underlying sense of underlying notion of relevance for a document, that they might actually look a little bit longer at a summary for a relevant document than for a not relevant document. Again, we can model different users. Some users might work faster than others. We could incorporate that into our model. Maybe we know something about the search information need, and maybe that affects the amount of time things. Maybe it affects the amount of decisions. What sort of tools are we actually going to be using to model like these decisions? Are we going to use some really simple, it's just going to be some stochastic coin flip type thing? Or are we actually going to have something that's more sophisticated and is going to have, some neural net behind there to represent the mental thinking of the user? There's lots of choices that we could consider. And so what's interesting is you could start with an initial model. You could start with very simple ways to model these decisions, very simple ways to model the amount of time being spent. And then you could replace them over time as your understanding of users improved, as your measurements of things improved. You could add more fidelity, basically, which should actually improve then your predictions with your model. Likewise, you could even go and, of course, change that user model and add more sophistication to it. Allow them not to only work down, but also take into other factors as well. So there's a lot actually there that we could do. All right, so that's the basics of the notions of creating a model. All right, so we've got to think about what's the overall framework, what is the thing that we're going to be trying to be measuring? And again, in our case, it's amount of relevant documents, and we're going to have the user interact over time, and that's because we care about the user interface elements and we want to capture that in our predictions. Then, well, what is the user interface for our modeling that we are considering? What's the level of complexity there that we're putting into it? And then the same thing for our user. How will they interact and work over that user interface and function. After we've made this, we've created the model, the next step is to work to calibrate this model, which is basically, we got to come up with this stuff. You know, how much time and how are they making decisions? We've got to figure, you know, we got to actually go a little, actually, calibration is not quite where we're ready to go yet. We've got to actually say how we're going to model these in there and then set those parameters, okay? Those will come together. So it's not entirely all calibration. We still have some more details to come up with. But then once we come up with those details and we move on to calibrations, how to set the parameters. Once we've set the parameters, the next thing is to validate the model. So basically, let's actually find out with real users, if we showed them these search results and we measured this, how many relevant documents would they actually find? Now, if we run that in our simulation, will we get the same answer or not? If we don't, our simulation is broken. If it's not off by too much, maybe we can understand and be accepting of what our experiment actually produces. All right, that's where we're headed. All right,